The spring of 1547 had brought no relief to the village of Thornfield. Disease had ravaged the countryside, taking with it nearly half the village, including the husband of young Helene Everhart. At 22, Helene found herself widowed, destitute, and alone in a world that held little mercy for women without protection. Helene stood at the edge of the village cemetery, her golden hair falling in unkempt waves around her shoulders. Despite the hardship that had befallen her, her beauty remained undimmed. High cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of summer skies. Her threadbare dress hung loosely on her slender frame, the neckline frayed and worn, dipping low enough to reveal the delicate contours of her collarbone. The coarse fabric could not disguise the feminine curves of her figure, though she pulled her tattered shawl tighter around herself against the morning chill. "Mistress Everhart," called a voice from behind her. Helene turned to see Father Tomas approaching, his face solemn but kind. Beside him walked a stout man with ink-stained fingers whom she recognized as the village scribe. "I am afraid I bring news that will take you away from your mourning," said the priest. "A messenger arrived from West Haven this morning. Your uncle, a man named Silas Everhart, has passed away." Helene looked confused. "I had no uncle Silas. He appears to have been your father's brother, though estranged long before your birth. The important matter is that he has left you his cottage and land on the northern edge of West Haven Forest." The scribe stepped forward with a document. "The property includes a cottage, a small orchard, and several acres of untilled land. You are the sole beneficiary." Helene's hands trembled as she took the parchment. "This cannot be. Why would a man I never knew leave me anything?" "Blood is blood, Mistress Everhart," said the priest. "And you have precious little keeping you in Thornfield now." 2 days later, Helene stood before the crumbling cottage that was now hers. The journey to West Haven had been arduous, but the old cart driver had been kind enough to take her for what meager coins she could spare. The inheritance was hardly the blessing she had briefly hoped for. The cottage sagged on one side, its roof partially collapsed. The orchard consisted of 3 gnarled apple trees that looked as if they had not produced fruit in years. Behind the cottage lay a small pond, murky and choked with weeds. The land, what the document had generously called several acres, was overgrown with weeds and brambles. "A fine legacy," she murmured bitterly to herself. "Land no one would want, trees that bear no fruit, and a house that threatens to collapse upon my head." As she stood contemplating whether to laugh or cry, a blur of gray fur bounded from the tall grass. Helene started, stepping back as a large dog circled her excitedly, its tail wagging. The animal was thin but appeared strong, with intelligent eyes that watched her expectantly. "And who might you be?" she asked. The dog barked once and trotted toward the cottage door, looking back as if expecting her to follow. Inside, the cottage was in disarray, dust-covered furniture, cobwebs in every corner, a table overturned. Yet beneath the neglect, she could see that the structure was sound. One room contained a small hearth, another a bed frame, without a mattress. A third room appeared to have been used for storage, with shelves lining the walls and a large trunk against one wall. The dog scratched impatiently at the wooden floorboards near the hearth. "Stop that," Helene commanded, though her voice lacked conviction. The animal continued scratching, then looked up at her with what almost seemed like purpose. Helene sighed and knelt beside the dog. "What is it you are trying to show me?" She ran her fingers along the floorboards and noticed one moved slightly under her touch. Curious, she pried it up and found a small space beneath. Inside lay a leather-bound journal and a small wooden box. The journal belonged to Silas Everhart. The first entry was dated nearly 30 years earlier. "I have secured the cottage at long last. Though I must live simply to avoid notice, it matters not. What lies beneath this land is worth more than all the gold in the king's treasury. The seed has been planted. Now I must wait for it to grow." Helene frowned. What seed could be worth more than gold? She continued reading, but the entries grew increasingly cryptic, filled with references to the harvest and the blooming night. Many pages contained drawings of plants she did not recognize, with notes in what appeared to be a personal cipher. The wooden box contained a single object, an unusual seed the size of her thumbnail, dark as onyx with faint silver markings etched across its surface. "What manner of seed is this?" she whispered. The dog whined and nudged her hand. A knock at the door startled her. Quickly hiding the journal and box beneath her shawl, Helene approached the entrance cautiously. Outside stood a man of middle years, well-dressed with a trimmed beard and calculating eyes. "Good day, madam. I am Baron Quinn, lord of these lands. Word reached me that Silas's heir had arrived." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her instinctively tighten her shawl. "I am Helene Everhart, my lord," she said with a small curtsy. "I have only just arrived." "A terrible shame about your uncle," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "A peculiar man, kept to himself. I have come to offer you a proposal. This land and cottage, they are hardly suitable for a young woman alone. I would be willing to purchase them from you. A fair price, enough for you to establish yourself elsewhere more comfortably." Helene hesitated. The offer was tempting. The cottage was indeed hardly habitable, and the land appeared worthless. Yet something in the Baron's too eager expression gave her pause. "You are most kind, my lord, but I have only just arrived. I would like some time to consider my inheritance before making such a decision." The Baron's smile tightened. "Of course, but do not wait too long. I shall return in a fortnight for your answer." He bowed slightly. "Until then, Mistress Everhart." As the Baron departed, an elderly woman emerged from the path leading to the village. She carried a basket covered with a cloth. "I see the Baron has already found you," she said by way of greeting. "I am Agnes, the midwife from the village. I brought you some bread and cheese. Thought you might be hungry after your journey." "That is most kind," Helene said, gratefully accepting the basket. "It was the least I could do for Silas's niece. He spoke of you, you know." Helene looked up sharply. "He knew of me?" Agnes nodded. "Oh yes. Kept a close eye on you from afar, he did. Said you were family, even if you did not know it." She glanced around nervously. "Be wary of Baron Quinn. He wanted this land badly, while Silas lived. Offered to buy it many times. But why? It seems worthless." Agnes smiled mysteriously. "Your uncle often said that the greatest treasures lie beneath our feet, if only we know where to look." She turned to leave. "I will come again tomorrow. The village folk are curious about you, but they are good people. Except—" her voice trailed off. "Except, there are stories about this place. Old tales. Some say Silas practiced forbidden arts. Others claim he discovered something in the ground that he should have left buried." Agnes touched a small charm hanging around her neck. "Just be careful, child. And whatever you do, do not dig where the moonlight touches the pond on a full moon night." After Agnes left, Helene explored the property further. The dog, whom she had begun to call Shadow for his habit of following her closely, led her around the perimeter of the land. The pond, though covered in algae, appeared deeper than she had first thought. At its edge grew plants she did not recognize, with unusual purple blooms despite the early spring season. That night, as Helene attempted to make the cottage habitable, Shadow began scratching at the floor again, this time in the storage room. With a sigh, she followed and discovered another loose floorboard. This one concealed a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be dried herbs and a folded piece of parchment with a map of the property. Certain areas were marked with symbols that matched those in the journal. The following days fell into a pattern. Helene worked to repair the cottage, clearing debris and scrubbing years of grime from the floors and walls. Several villagers, curious about the newcomer, visited with small offerings, a loaf of bread, some candles, a blanket. Each seemed to study her carefully, as if looking for some sign. All asked if she planned to sell to the Baron. All seemed relieved when she said she had not decided. A week after her arrival, Helene was working in the overgrown garden when a young man approached. He was tall and handsome, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. Mistress Everhart? I am Benjamin Quinton, the blacksmith's son. My father sent me with these. He held out a set of basic tools, a hammer, some nails, and a small hunting knife. Your father is most generous, she said, wiping her hands on her skirt before accepting them. Her movement caused her shawl to slip slightly, revealing the curve of her shoulder and the delicate line of her neck. Benjamin looked away quickly, a flush rising to his cheeks. It is nothing. We all wish to help. Silas was, well, he kept to himself, but he aided my family once when we needed it most. He gestured to the garden. Would you like some assistance? I know something of planting. Helene hesitated, then nodded. As they worked, Benjamin spoke of the village and its inhabitants. He mentioned, almost casually, that the Baron had doubled the taxes on the village in recent years. Many believe there is gold on these lands, he said. The Baron has been obsessed with finding it. Gold. Helene looked around at the unremarkable property. Benjamin shrugged. Just village talk. But it is strange how determined he is to acquire this particular plot of land. That evening, Helene read more of her uncle's journal. The entries grew more excited over time, with references to the first harvest and the transformation. One passage caught her attention. The seed grows best where water touches earth under moonlight. The flower blooms but once a year, on the night when winter surrenders to spring. Its nectar, properly prepared, transforms the commonest metal to purest gold. Helene stared at the black seed she had found. Could it be what Silas had referenced? She looked out the window toward the pond, recalling Agnes's warning not to dig where moonlight touched the water on a full moon night. The next day was the spring equinox, and that night would bring a full moon. As darkness fell, Helene made a decision. Taking the seed and a small spade, she waited until the moon rose high enough to cast its reflection on the pond. Shadow followed, keeping close to her heels as she approached the water's edge. Where the moonlight touched the bank, the earth seemed to shimmer slightly. Helene knelt and began to dig, creating a small hole about the depth of her hand. As she placed the seed in the dark soil, she felt a strange warmth emanate from it. I do not know if this is madness or wisdom, she whispered as she covered the seed. But I have little left to lose. A twig snapped behind her. Helene turned to see Baron Quinn emerging from the shadows, 2 men at his side. I thought I might find you engaged in such activities, he said smoothly. Following in your uncle's footsteps so soon? Helene stood quickly. My lord, I was merely planting. Spare me your lies, girl. I know what Silas discovered. I know what grows in this cursed soil. He gestured to his men. Search the cottage. Find the journal and the other seeds. You have no right, Helene protested, but the Baron grabbed her arm roughly. I have every right. This land should have been mine years ago. Your uncle was a thief and a heretic. Whatever he told you. A growl interrupted him as Shadow launched himself at the Baron, teeth bared. Quinn shouted in pain and surprise, releasing Helene as he tried to fend off the dog. In the confusion, Helene ran toward the cottage, hoping to reach it before the Baron's men found the journal. She was too late. One man emerged from the doorway, holding the leather-bound book triumphantly. Found it, my lord. And look, pages of drawings, formulas. The Baron, having kicked Shadow away, strode toward his man with a gleeful expression. At last, the secret will be mine. Suddenly, the ground beneath the freshly planted seed began to tremble. A tiny green shoot emerged, growing visibly in the moonlight. Within moments it had reached the height of Helene's knee, then her waist, then higher still. Pale silver flowers unfurled along its stem, each releasing a luminous pollen that drifted on the night air. The Baron and his men stood transfixed. The alchemist's flower, Quinn whispered. Just as the rumors claimed, one touch of its nectar to base metal. He rushed forward, reaching for the nearest bloom. As his fingers brushed the petal, the plant shuddered. The flower closed around his hand, then his arm. The Baron screamed as more tendrils wrapped around his body. His men fled in terror. Helene watched in horror as the plant seemed to draw the very life from the Baron, his struggles growing weaker until he hung limply in its embrace. Then, as suddenly as it had grown, the plant released him. Quinn collapsed to the ground, but where he fell, the earth sparkled with a golden sheen. By dawn, word of the night's events had spread through the village. Agnes arrived with several elders, their faces grave. "It has begun again," the midwife said. "The cycle your uncle tried to control." Helene, exhausted and confused, showed them the journal. "What is this plant? What happened to the Baron?" One of the elders, a man with a long white beard, examined the pages carefully. "Silas discovered what our ancestors knew, but dared not speak of. The earth here contains an ancient power. Once every generation, it awakens fully. The seed draws life from those with greed in their hearts and transforms that energy." He pointed to where the Baron had fallen. "Not into gold, as the legends claim, but into fertile soil that will yield crops 100-fold more bountiful than any in the kingdom." "Your uncle protected this secret," Agnes added. "He knew that if the wrong people discovered it, they would exploit it without understanding its true purpose. The plant does not create wealth through gold. It creates it through abundance." Over the following weeks, Helene, with Benjamin's help, planted the newly enriched field with wheat, barley, and vegetables. True to the elders' words, the crops grew at an astonishing rate, yielding a harvest that would normally take a full season in mere weeks. The Baron had not died, but something fundamental had changed in him. He recovered physically, but seemed to have forgotten his obsession with the land and his cruelty toward the villagers. The incident was explained away as a fever that had affected his mind, and his cousin took over the management of his affairs. As summer approached, Helene stood in her flourishing fields, watching as villagers came to trade for her abundant produce. Shadow lay contentedly nearby, his coat glossy and healthy now. In the cottage, which Benjamin had helped her repair, the journal remained hidden beneath the floorboards, its secrets protected until they might be needed again. "You have created something remarkable here," Benjamin said, joining her with a basket of freshly harvested carrots. Over the months, their friendship had blossomed into something deeper. His gentle nature had helped heal the wounds of grief that had marked her arrival. "Not I," Helene replied. "My uncle understood that true wealth comes not from gold but from the earth itself, from growing things that sustain life." In the pond, which now gleamed clear and clean in the sunlight, a single black seed lay dormant in the mud, waiting for the next time it would be needed. And in the cottage, beneath another loose floorboard that Shadow had revealed, lay a pouch containing more such seeds, insurance against future hardship, a legacy more precious than any treasure of silver or gold. As autumn painted the orchard trees with vibrant colors and the restored cottage stood warm and inviting against the cooling air, Helene realized that her inheritance had been far more valuable than she could have imagined. From a single seed planted in desperation had grown not just abundance, but a home, a community, and hope for the future. Benjamin took her hand, his eyes warm with affection and promise. "Your uncle would be proud of what you have done here." Helene smiled, thinking of how far she had come since those dark days of loss that had brought her to this place. The barren land had yielded its secret bounty, just as her broken heart had found room to grow love anew. From the deepest grief had sprung the seeds of joy, proving that sometimes the most unpromising ground can yield the richest harvest.